Okay, so here's the hook. Russian art consists of one unbroken 86-minute take, with almost 2,000 actors in intricately accurate period costumes, showcasing the grandiose Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg and 300 years of Russian history with moment after moment of striking visuals. It's an art house classic and an astounding piece of filmmaking. Let me be clear, this movie is not for everyone. It is slow, and it appears to be plotless, just a walking tour of one of the few museums that could rival the Louvre in its scale and the quality of its collection. You could watch this sound off and just marvel at the visuals, but you'd be missing an awful lot. This film never seems to break a sweat as it charges down hallways after frolicking girls or swoops between crowds of dancers or navigates an intricate diplomatic ceremony to avoid a war. The camera rambles out into negative 24 degrees Celsius weather and back into art galleries, somehow never cracking or fogging over the lenses with pivots in temperature. The cinematographer, a guy lugging a massive hard drive, another guy lugging the quickly depleting battery pack, dolly operators, and a translator, because of course they couldn't all speak either Russian or German, make it all look easy. 2,000 people simultaneously in costume and makeup, advance and rear crews of stage managers. The narrator, played by the disembodied voice of director Alexander Sokurov, finds himself at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg in the lead up to the last great ball of Imperial Russia. Good-looking young soldiers and ladies hustle inside, hoping to sneak into the party to end all parties, hosted by the blessed Emperor Alexander I. Much later in the film, we'll watch the little drama of one soldier from this group who comes to the party without a date, trying cheekily to cut in on his friend's girl. As our narrator follows the revelers through the back staircases into the palace, he stumbles onto another time traveler, the European, a querulous eccentric in black who seems to know everything and appreciate nothing about Russia. He's funny, rude, irritating, and endearing. Our narrator apologizes repeatedly to the many people the strange man offends, explaining that he's European. The tension between the European and our narrator, who is a dogged Russian apologist, guides much of the film's ideas. We see the crudeness of Russia's great Nicholas I and the palace's kitschy attempts to copy Raphael and the Vatican in its nouveau riche way. We see the anxiousness of Catherine the Great watching a dress rehearsal of one of her own plays, a spectacle to rival anything in Paris, and once it's over, she applauds herself, and then she runs off shouting that she has to pee. The orchestra at that performance is sublime, so the European insists, well, those must be Italians brought in to perform. But the narrator insists, no, these correctly are Russians. In fact, it's the Hermitage's own orchestra. The narrator unveils scene after scene of Russian glory, and the European pushes back, convinced of Western Europe's superiority. People like Custine were as curious about Russia as they were about dancing bears. As a big fan of War and Peace, I appreciate the Russian identity struggle. Much of Tolstoy's Epic of Epics is about Russia coming to realize it's in an unrequited love affair with Europe, France especially. Once Napoleon has shown his contempt and invaded Russia, there's a great scene where the French-speaking upper classes in Russia host a party where everybody's going to be fined anytime they speak a word that's not in Russian. The hostess flounders when trying to speak of an affair. What is the word in Russian for love, she gasps? Tolstoy found peace through Russian self-love, his characters finding true joy in a hunting shack dancing to traditional music with a rustic uncle. Russian art tries to bring that self-love home, but the St. Petersburg way, showing that Russia can be just as European as the best of them. St. Petersburg was a city built to be Europe on the Neva River. The conclusion, a spectacular ball led by Valery Gergiev and the Mariinsky Ballet Orchestra, is both a glorious feat of music, dance, costuming, and cinematography, and a rebuke to anybody who thinks that Russia is anything less than. And while it's all very frou-frou and Western, it should be noticed that Gergiev leads the dancers in an Eastern mazurka. Together, the narrator and the European wander the galleries of the Winter Palace, now the Hermitage Museum, hopping from one era in Russian history to the next. They meet Peter the Great, who built St. Petersburg on a reclaimed swamp, much as Pierre-Charles L'Enfant thrust Washington, D.C. into existence as my own country's unlikely capital. The Tsar and the first Emperor is an unpleasant bully. They also meet Catherine the Great, who transformed her own love of art and theater into this splendid collection. They cross paths several times with Pushkin, Russia's greatest poet. They meet the Hermitage's directors of the past and current artists and intellectuals of the Russian scene. Germany, that relatively small nation that has repeatedly threatened to crush Russia, overshadows this film. At one point, the European barges into a closed room, and he finds there a man carving his own coffin during the Nazi siege of St. Petersburg from 1941 to 1944. All the paintings have been hidden, and the palace is on the verge of collapse. The cinematographer Tilman Buttner, without whom this movie could not have happened, is a German, and felt that the ugliness of the two countries' histories needed to be showcased. My wife commented that the European acts like the Doctor of Doctor Who, and I can't say she's wrong. He is arrogant, witty, wildly eccentric, and detached from normal human interactions. Despite his 19th century garb, the European interacts with strangers as if using his psychic paper to convince everybody he belongs here. The narrator and the European seem to be able to either remain invisible or touch and speak with the people they meet, as the situation demands. Yet the European is no Time Lord. He is a fictionalized real person, the Marquis de Custine. Custine was a celebrity in 19th century Europe who, on the advice of his friend Honoré de Balzac, tried to introduce East European culture to the West with lively, opinionated travel writing. His book, La Russie en 1839, was a huge hit everywhere except in Russia, only being fully and legally printed there in 1996. Some called Custine the de Tocqueville of Russia. A lot of Russians called him a lot of other names. He was a wild personality, openly gay, but also a hardcore reactionary Catholic.
Откуда вы знаете, какими станут люди, если вы не знаете священной истории для вас?
The Custine we get in this movie is a baffling eccentric who scoffs at and yet is enthralled by Russian culture. The European eventually finds a kindred spirit in Alla Osipinko, Russia's greatest ballerina of the day, who is dialoguing with a painting and moves as if interpretive dance is her only language. The painting she is communing with, Rembrandt's Danae, is perhaps the Hermitage's best-known work. It was attacked in 1985 by a politically motivated maniac wielding a knife and a jar of acid. And what we see here is the heavily restored version. There's an undercurrent in the film of people attacking the museum and art itself. This crazy, the Germans, the communists, and even the European, who acts as a self-appointed gatekeeper of what Russians can and cannot understand about art. When the current Hermitage museum director meets his two deceased predecessors, one of whom was his own father, they can only speak obliquely about the Soviet censorship that weighs down their work. And their work is to preserve culture and to preserve history. What culture and history are, how subjectively they're defined, is central to the movie, as they were to Tolstoy. Who writes history? The winners? Okay, but the winners this time, or the winners last time, or the time before that. What's great about Russia is not the same for Nicholas the Great, or Catherine the Great, or Alexander I, or the Marquis de Custine, or the Bolsheviks, or Stalin, or Mikhail Gorbachev, or Alexander Sukharov. As Sukharov has highlighted in his interviews, we have at once a time-hopping 300-year span of Russian history here, bound to an 86-minute take which binds it all to our time. Not just to 2003, but literally to our own personal time. If you watch Russian art, Sukharov is exchanging years of careful preparation and the harrowing 86 minutes of filming that his cast and crew endured to give us his film for 86 minutes of our lives, which we'll never get back. Like I said at the top, the movie's not for everyone, and those 86 minutes might be something you prize or something you regret. I've given Sukharov my 86 minutes multiple times, and I don't regret a thing.